Hi everyone, it's Liz Danoon here, and it is Tuesday, so I am back to my series of 3 Facebook Lives for this week. Today's topic is one that I get asked about all the time, and since I've been doing Facebook Lives, I've been getting even more people asking me about this particular topic. So the topic is, how do you go about getting a learning assessment for a struggling child? And I was thinking about how to answer this question, and I thought to myself, this is something that I covered in my book. And so the book that I wrote this about 2010, 2011. And then I actually did a re-edit of it, and I did a second edition, and that came out, I think, 2015. So the book I wrote, for you it's backwards, unless you're watching it on YouTube, is Helping Children with Dyslexia. And you can see there I managed to get Sir Richard Branson to write the foreword for me. And it was just a great experience, and he is just such a wonderful man. So this book is really all about how to assist a child who's got dyslexia. Now, my 3 children have been diagnosed with dyslexia. These aren't my 3 children, these are just stock shots. But my children, I've got 2 boys and a girl. They're all growing up now, and they've all done really well. But I wrote this book in a direct response to helping my children, and then seeing that lots of other parents needed some help too. So if you ever get a chance to see this book, you can find it in your local library. So many different libraries purchased copies when it first came out. You can find it in your bookshop. You can also find it online at Dyslexia Daily, which is our website. And I ship this book all around the world for a cost of $7.50 for postage and handling. So that doesn't matter where this book goes to, whether it ends up in Africa or Sweden or Finland or Europe or oh gosh, it really has ended up in a lot of places. It's ended up in some of the, I think there's one in Mexico, like all sorts of places. It's sold thousands and thousands of copies, and I've actually just done another order for, I think, 3,000 more, because we're about to run out of them. So you can get them from dyslexiadaily.com, and you can also get them on Amazon. So Amazon stock it as well. But when I was answering this question about how to go about getting an assessment for a child who's got some learning difficulties or showing the signs of learning difficulty, I thought there is no point reinventing the wheel. I may as well go back and look at what I wrote in this book. So I'm in this book, and I'm in the chapter, How to Get an Accurate Diagnosis for a Struggling Child, because these were the questions that parents were asking me, and that's how these chapters ended up in this book. So it starts off why you need to know if your child has a learning disability or not. Now, in this book, I write disability because in Australia, generally to get any sort of accommodations, you have to call it a disability. Now, you and I both know that Richard Branson is not disabled. So it's one of those words that can be a bit contentious depending on where you live. I think I've said to you before, New Zealand tends to say a learning difficulty or a learning difference. America tends to call it a learning disability. That's just the culture that is there. Europe and the UK tends to say more learning difficulty. I err on the side of learning difficulty, learning difference. But this book was specifically about dyslexia, but it's so helpful for anybody who's got a child who's struggling, because I literally covered everything that parents wanted to know, and there were the things that I wanted to know as well. So let me just start off by telling you why you need to know or not if your child has a learning disability, and here is why. It seems to be a general worldwide trend that there is a reluctance to label children with a specific learning disability, and most parents will have their own view on this. The outcome of this reluctance to label is this: without some form of diagnosis and recognised label, your child may never receive the level of assistance they are entitled to from the relevant educational authorities, regardless of the extent of their dyslexia or learning disability. Wouldn't you want them to receive as much assistance as possible while they're at school? Childhood, youth and formal education is such a short phase of a person's long life. However, We all know that what happens during these years can determine the adult they will become, the attitude, skills, and confidence they will develop, and the future they can look forward to. Ultimately, it's your choice whether you label your child or not, or whether you have them tested or not, and whether you decide to apply the label once you get it. Just, my advice is, don't waste the opportunity to help your child as early as you can if they appear to be struggling. It is the one time when being a pushy parent can be a major positive, and it can be critical when it means the difference between your child being given extra assistance or not. Even if you don't have a definite diagnosis or label, you have to wait to see a specialist. Your child can still receive extra assistance from teachers, educational specialists, and parents, or me, if they are struggling to learn and are not reaching educational benchmarks. There is also no reason why you can't begin to offer your child some assistance at home. Please remember that many experts define dyslexia as a complex brain processing problem which needs to be diagnosed accurately by specialists with the appropriate qualifications. When your child is at school in their classroom, most teachers only see their behaviour and the schoolwork they produce. Hi, Denise. This can illustrate the symptoms of certain brain processing issues, but it is never and will never be an accurate way to diagnose dyslexia. So just to go back to that, when a child's at school, teachers generally see the symptoms. They see all the things that come after or whilst the child is struggling. That can sometimes be the child withdrawing or having bad behaviour, or not wanting to be at school or not wanting to go to school, struggling with their friendship groups. Those types of things are the symptoms quite often of a child having a difficulty around learning. And the schoolwork they produce is also a reflection of their difficulty to learn. It is not a way to diagnose dyslexia. Dyslexia or specific learning difficulties are quite complex. So there are only certain people who are able to diagnose them. And this is a very important part of this whole equation for parents. The reason is the person who diagnoses your child must be recognised by your educational authority. Now, if they're not, that means that when you apply for accommodations around tests and exams, particularly in the higher school levels, as in Year 11 and Year 12, unless the diagnosis that you've received is recognised, then that's not going to help you. So don't go spending money on a diagnosis that is not going to get you what you need from your educational authority. Hi, Shelley Ray. Lovely to see you too. So make sure you get your diagnosis with the right person. And these are the people that I recommend you get your diagnosis through. I've got them all listed. Who is qualified to test your child for dyslexia? Amanda has just asked me the approximate cost to have dyslexia diagnosed, and I will cover that right at the end, Amanda, once I go through this list of who is qualified. It's a good question though, thank you. An in-school learning support teacher or counsellor with the appropriate postgraduate qualifications. They generally have a Masters of Education in dyslexia or learning difficulties. You need to check their qualifications thoroughly though. If you require a clarification, you can check with the Dyslexia Authority. So quite often that's the Dyslexia Association in your state or territory that you need to check with. And you can also check with your school authority as well, whether that teacher with the postgraduate qualifications has the right qualification. Now, there are a lot of these types of assessors in England and the UK. They have a much better structured education system around supporting children with dyslexia, I find. There are very few educational specialists here in Australia, and I know mostly in the US they tend to be psychologists, and let me get onto that now. So a developmental paediatrician, although you may need to get a referral from your family doctor. And Jo Lynn has just asked me what you do when your district doesn't recognise dyslexia. I'll get back to you on that one as well. So here's the list of psychologists that you can look at. A developmental child psychologist, an educational neuropsychologist, an educational psychologist who you can find privately. So they might run a private practice, but most school regional areas will have a group of educational psychologists who actually go around to all the schools in your region. And you can actually put an application into your school with the support of your teacher and principal to actually have your child assessed through your school system. Now, this is easier in some places than others. And I also had parents saying to me that I have to prove that my child is really struggling before the school system will even consider doing a diagnosis. This is the issue when you've got those twice exceptional children, the ones who are super, super smart, but struggle with dyslexia. They'll struggle with literacy because of dyslexia. They quite often have such great compensatory strategies that their marks won't actually show how hard they have to work. And they quite often miss out on being assessed for that reason. So it sounds ridiculous, but you literally need to have a child sometimes that A, is struggling so badly, but B, it shows on all their marks so that the school will then, or your district will then fund that educational psychologist to come out and do an assessment of your child. But look, persevere if that describes what you have got in your system, because it is well worth it to consider it. So that's the educational psychologist who may be allocated to assist you through your government's education department. Now, quite often children's hospitals, hi Christine, how are you? Hope you're having a good Tuesday, or maybe it's not Tuesday, it might still be Wednesday where you are. I mean, Monday wherever you are, I'm not sure. So a children's hospital will often have a department specifically for children with developmental or specific learning disabilities, where all the appropriate specialists are available. Now, this could include pediatricians, psychologists, social workers, speech therapists, pediatricians, where I'm up to, psychologists, social workers, nurses, teachers, and others. These departments often have close links with educational authorities. And that means that you won't have to get further testing done, because you'll get a comprehensive report that can then be spread out to everybody concerned that comes into contact with your child in terms of education. So you've also got those private clinics that specialise in diagnosis of children's developmental and learning disabilities, specifically dyslexia. Now, just because you take your child for an assessment and perhaps they don't end up being diagnosed with dyslexia, they may very well be diagnosed with something else that also draws funding or also draws support. So keep your eyes open for the potential things. There's all types of things that come under the umbrella of learning difficulties and learning disabilities. You know, dyspraxia, visual processing deficits, auditory processing deficits, apraxia, which is the one where you have difficulty speaking, dysgraphia, where you have trouble controlling your pen or pencil. There's a whole gamut. And I talk about those all in here if you want to know more about all the things that could be impacting on your child. So they are the people who can diagnose for dyslexia around the world. The other place it pays to look is your dyslexia association. Quite often dyslexia associations have service providers that they recommend, and quite often they will be people who are well and truly educated in terms of getting a diagnosis done. Now, Amanda's just said to me that they're having trouble getting help for his son as his verbal skills put him above the 72 mark. Can I tell you, Amanda, that exact same thing happened to my middle son. He was diagnosed with dyslexia quite early, but his verbal skills were so high. I think he was about 10 and he had the verbal skills of about a 16-year-old. So yes, that's very common, and that's a compensatory technique. It doesn't mean he doesn't struggle with words on the page. So I know it's tough and it makes it very hard to get him tested, but persevere, because I think you might find that there are laws around what deems a child needs to be assessed. So have a look at the laws in your state or territory. Now, I had a couple of questions. people said to me, how much does it cost to get a diagnosis? Now, it depends on who you get to do it. So you can try your school district first to see what resources they have available. You can try, and invariably that's free because it's done through your school, but sometimes the waiting lists are great, and it depends how long you've got to wait. You've also got the private clinics. Now, they tend to be at the more expensive end, and so do some of our dyslexia associations. So what happens is, I know here in Australia, they can charge between, at the moment it's gone crazy, $1,200 to $1,400 here in Australia to get a diagnosis through a private clinician, particularly if you go through an association, which I think is just crazy. Sometimes you can actually find a specialist that will work at those associations, but they're actually in private practice, and you can actually find those specialists who are really, really good at what they do, but they're in private practice. So look out for their names and do some Googling and Skyping and whatever, and see if you can find them. Now, another relatively reasonable way to get a diagnosis, which I didn't even mention then, but I will now, is to go through a university that has a faculty of psychology. So what happens is a psychologist is qualified, then they go back to become an educational psychologist or a neuropsychologist or a developmental psychologist. They then go back to actually get the extra qualification. Now, doing that means they have to do so many practical hours, and quite often those psychologists will then be doing diagnoses in the clinic at the university. The university then charges that person out, but the thing that makes it great is they're always overseen by a senior educational psychologist. So you've then got two people looking at all the results. You've got the person who's in training plus the person who's actually overseeing them, which is often the head of the faculty or the person who's watching over that particular student who's working their way through the program. Now, I know in Australia you can get a diagnosis that way for about $300 to $500, and the report is just as good. It is a good idea, though, to find somebody who is just an absolute gun at this. And by that I mean the people who produce the long report that the education department wants, the 2-page summary in layperson's terms that you can give out to teachers and that you can use yourself to work out what your child's strengths and weaknesses profile is and how to help them. Plus, it means that you get a complete plan of what you might then be able to use to then get your child learning the right way. So the really good diagnosis specialist will actually give you all those things: the summary, the complete report, and also a plan of what to do moving forward. So it's definitely worth looking out for those people. What do you do when your state doesn't recognise dyslexia? I think you might find that if you actually go back and have a look at well, start by looking in here first, because there's actually some information on there's a No Child Left Behind policy in America, which is, I'm pretty sure, still in place. And it basically says that if you have a child with a specific learning disability, they have to be supported. So please look at your federal rules. And I also had people saying your IEP. Your IEP is your individual education plan, and yes, it's a legal document. If your school writes you one, they have to stick with it. And you have to have regular meetings with them, and you have to get feedback for it. So basically, you really have some options. Here in Australia, we have the 2005 Education Act, which says that every child with a learning difficulty must receive support. So basically, everybody should, if their child is struggling for a prolonged period of time with the same repeated tasks, yet they're receiving some good support, you really should look at getting a diagnosis through those people I've suggested. There will be a blog post on this, which will come out next Tuesday. So you can actually get all this information in the blog post that comes out. And make sure, I'm supposed to have been saying this the whole time, but if you like what I've been posting about and talking about on my Facebook Lives, please like the posts, and please share them with your friends as well, because the idea is about helping as many people as possible. Rachel's just told us that the cost in the UK does vary, but it's around £500, which is basically equivalent of about 700 US dollars and about 1,000 Australian dollars. So it's pretty much on par. That is fine, Jolyn. I really love everyone's questions because it means that you're out there seeking ways to help your child, and I think that's just so important. So I hope I've helped lots of people today. Please, in the comments, put your questions in, because what I do is I go back through all the comments on a regular basis, and if I see something that people are commenting on regularly, then I know that I can actually answer that question for you. So Denise has said here in Cali, I'm assuming that's California, Denise, fill me in. The first place she checked was $1,800. Well, that is really huge. So yes, that's a bit of a worry. And it's really crazy that we've got children who are struggling, and yet there's people out there charging that much money to help them. So don't forget, you've got the options for screening first. I'm so glad I'm helping you, Denise, because that's really important to me. And yes, it is California. Thank you. That's so great. So yeah, I hope I'm helping, and yeah, keep persevering. My book is probably a great place to start. It's where I started on my journey to help my children. And as I said, thousands and thousands of people have got the book, and it really does cover everything. So maybe I'll talk about the book in another Facebook Live, and you can see what's in it and all the things it covers. So have a great day, everyone. I hope you're having a super Tuesday or Monday night if you're in the US. And I think it's very early Tuesday morning in the UK. And yes, Rachel, you're correct. Screening is always a great first step. And there are some excellent screening programs out there. So if you're not sure, go for a screener. And see what you can find in the screening department, because that is a great way of determining whether you should go ahead and get an assessment. And your school should be able to help you with that. They really should. And if they can't, try your Dyslexia Association. Okay, everyone, bye for now. Have a great day. See you soon. Bye.